Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and wonder if the person you see is actually you? Do you even know what self is? And are you aware that your self-presentation affects yourself? According to George Herbert Mead, an American sociologist, best known as the founder of American pragmatism, the body is not a self. It only becomes a self when the mind has developed. The general mechanism for the development of self is called reflexivity. Reflexivity is the ability to put ourselves unconsciously into others. In order to have this so-called self, the individual must be able to get outside of themselves so they can evaluate and become object to themselves. Mead believes that social interaction plays an important role in the development of self. A child develops this through play and game. The play stage is the first stage in childhood development, in which we learn to imitate the roles of others around us, or in other words, role play. This includes teachers, parents, and close relatives. By taking the roles of these adults who are closest to them, children develop a better understanding of adult social roles. The game stage is the second stage in child development, in which the children begin to play complex games that require them to not only know and understand their own roles, but also the roles of others involved in the game and the relationships between these roles. For example is the generalized other is the final stage in the childhood development process, in which children are able to not only take on the roles of others, but also take into account the attitudes and perspectives of others in their social group. For a example,
Hoy baby, dapat saan mo ako mama? Mama, dati ako ginagawa. Hindi ako mama, ikaw alagaan mo. Kasi ikaw, tatay ko, nakakasama dapat. Yan ka na.
Mead also presented two aspects of the self, the I and the me. The me is your social self. It is the organized set of attitude of others which an individual assume. It is the accumulated understanding of the generalized other, the object and the known. The I, on the other hand, is your response to me. Basically, your response to the attitude of others, an individual impulse, the subject and the known. To further explain, here's an example of me and I.
Alam mo, ang benta ng jokes mo. Parang NFA rice pinipilahan. Hala, nakakatawa ba yun? Wali-wali nga ng jokes mo, man. Ang titindahan, lugi na siya.
basically, me allows the individual to live comfortably in the social world, while I makes the change of society possible. Here are the roles of society. First off, it sets the standards of how the me should be carried out by individuals in, society. Second is the formation of the institution. When the whole community acts toward the individual under certain circumstances in a identical way, there is an identical response on the part of the whole community under such conditions. Third is education, a process by which the common habit of the community are internalized by the actor. Emergence. The whole is seen as more than the sum of its parts, or it involves a reorganization, but the reorganization brings in something that was not there before. This is Charles Horton Cooley's looking glass self theory. It is the process wherein individuals base their sense of self on how they believe others view them. Another is using social interaction as a type of mirror. People use the judgments they receive from others to measure their own worth, values, and behaviors. It suggests that self-concept is built not in solitude but rather within social settings. Core assumptions. According to Society in Focus, the process of discovering the looking glass self occurs in 3 steps. First is an individual in a social situation imagines how they appear to others. Second is that the individual imagines others' judgment of that appearance. Finally, the individual develops feelings about and responds to those perceived judgments.
Kasi nung... Ayaw mo pasalihin ng mga pangit mo. Bakit ayaw ko nila pasalihin? Ayaw mo. Wala ka pang ginawa. Pangit na uwi. Hindi pa ayaw. Nasipa ka. Uy, pangit. Ay! Lang sila mga bata mo. Ano din yung anak mo? Sa bahay ka na lang maglaro.
Ay, ano yan? Hindi ba yan? Bakit tumatalon? Bumbongera ka naman eh.
Hindi! Joke lang yun!
Hindi ka nagsusumbong? Titis ka yan? Sige kala mo lang namin.
Oh, hindi!
Tara, bilog-bilogan na tayo.
Last but not the least is Irving Goffman.
What is dramaturgy? Dramaturgy is a view of social life as a series of dramatic performances akin to those performed on the stage. It itself is perceived not as a possession of the actor, but a product of the dramatic interaction between actor and audience. It is also concerned with the process by which disturbances caused by the audience are prevented or dealt with it. One technique that actor uses is impression management. It is techniques that actors use in order to maintain certain impressions in the face of problems they are likely to encounter and the methods they use to cope with the said problems. Dramaturgy is subsequently composed of 3 parts. First is the front stage, the backstage, and the outside. Here's an example.
Ano na bang chapter mo? Words, reference, Chapter 16 na ako matatapos na.
Wala ka naman pala yun.
7 points and hindi na chapter
Nakala ko. Oh, boy, ito na. Lunch muna.
Brenda, you're prepared.
Kanina pa nga dyan ah.
Bakit? Ang dami kaya nito.
Ready na ako. Ikaw.
Wala na kailangan yun eh.
Kailangan. Grabe naman. Ayaw namin.
Hindi kailangan.
Ano
sayang ng pagod niyo dyan.
Ayaw
Diba
namin
yun?
matulad dito. Ayaw sayang pagod namin. Para ayaw namin matulad kayo.
Kapasa naman kayo, ay hindi kayo mag-review.
Eh, kami, kailangan namin i-review. Bakit ka na maingay?
Apat na may... Ilan ba? Apat na major? Ang lalagpasan lahat to. Saan na nga yun? Ano na itong iba?
Yan ang video. Tapos lang ako sa finals. Hindi na kasi hindi. Hindi naman.
Ako 225 lang eh. 225 nga lang ako eh.
Tapos,
Ilan po?
sa iba kaya, ano ba yung nangyayari sa akin? Ibang sabi.
Hindi pa naman yung tinutukan natin yung mga ito.
Oh, pa. Gusta?
Ganyan ang game mo.
Siyempre!
Oh! Uno? Hindi naman kasi kailangan.
Ano ba na yung kailangan mo wala nga yung camera?
Ano ginawa mo? May, kailangan mo tamang kain, ha?
Tapos ka.
From dramaturgy stems role distance. It is deals with the degree to which individuals separate themselves from the roles they are in. Example: older children during dangerous tricks in a merry-go-round to show people that they are not as immersed in the activity as the younger children. What is self-esteem?
What is self-esteem? Self-esteem is the evaluative component of self-concept. Also, it's dependent on which characteristics of the self are contingencies of self-esteem and how we evaluate each of them. There are mainly two types of contingencies. First is high self-esteem, in which if we weigh our positively evaluated identities and traits as more important. And on the other hand, low if we weigh our negatively evaluated identities heavily. For example is
Contingencies of self-esteem. It is the characteristics of self or categories of outcomes on which a person stakes self-esteem.
Uy! May pagkira ako. Nagustuhan ko sila ang lalaki. Tapos, hindi ako nagustuhan. Kasi hindi ako masyadong matangkad. Tapos medyo maarte ako, medyo suplada, ganyan. Focus ka lang sila sa mga positive traits. Kanya, maganda ka. Talented ka, magaling sa lahat. Kumakanta, sumasayaw. Nanay ko, wala daw magkakagusto sa akin kasi hindi naman daw ako masyadong marunong sa gawaing bahay. Tapos yung mga suplada daw ako maarte, ganyan. Hindi ako focus ka sa friends mo. Kami, nandito lang naman kami. Siyempre, may kautos ako sa Malihan. Tapos sabi sa akin ng isang kaibigan na huwag daw ako sumali ulit. Kasi hindi naman daw ako magandang matalented. Hindi daw ako masyadong marunong. Hindi daw ako makatangkad. Sino ba yung makakita? Mag-focus ka nga dun sa mga sinasabi sa'yo. Stay positive ka lang. Alam mo, kahit na magaling ako kumanta, ganyan, sumayaw, sumarte, kahit talented ako, out there, may mas better pa rin kaysa sa akin. Ano ka ba, sis? Puro negative thoughts eh, no? Stay positive. Stay positive.
there are three sources of self-esteem.
First is family experience. Family influences on self-esteem confirm the idea that the self-concepts we develop mirror the view of ourselves communicated by significant others. For example, second is performance feedback. It is the everyday feedback about the quality of our performances, our successes and failures. For example, and the third is social comparison. Means comparison of our actions with our own goals and self-expectations or with the performances of others to interpret whether performances represent success or failure. And social comparison is crucial to self-esteem because the feelings of competence or worth we derive from a performance depend in large part on whom we are compared. both by ourselves and others. For example,
So, how do we protect our self-esteem? First is manipulating appraisals. We choose to associate with people who share our views of self and avoid people who don't.
this is selective information processing. It is attending more to those occurrences that are consistent with our self-evaluation.
Selective social comparison. By carefully selecting others with whom to compare ourselves, we can further protect our self-esteem. Is selective commitment to identities. Committing ourselves more to those self-concepts that provide feedback consistent with our self-evaluation, downgrading those that provide feedback that challenges.
What is self-presentation? Self-presentation is the processes by which individuals attempt to control the impressions that others form of them in social interactions. These individuals may or may not be aware of these processes. There are three types of self-presentation. First is authentic self-presentation. It is the goal is to create an image of ourselves in the eyes of others that is consistent with the way we view ourselves, our real self. For example, next is ideal self-presentation. The goal is to establish a public image of ourselves that is consistent with what we wish we were, our ideal self. For example, third is tactical self-presentation. The goal is to establish a public image of ourselves that is consistent with what others want or expect us to be. For example, there are 6 self-presentation tactical impression strategies. First is self-promotion. Here's an example.
Nahihirapan ako ngayon sa mga subjects ko. Mga major. Mahirap eh. Alanganin kaya ako ngayon. Ano pinaproblema? Dali-dali. Ano mga major? Saan ba doon? Lahat eh. Basta mga major ko eh. Pati yung mga minor subjects eh. Kasi major yung dali eh.
Dali-dali mag-uli. Yung person na ako eh. Inom lang kami. Wala naman. Kahit attendance din na kailangan. Basta makipasa ng test. Pasado mo kami lagi.
Ano ginagawa mo nun? Ako kasi hindi na nga ako makainom eh. Ganun pa din eh.
Ewan ko kung bakit yun eh. Dali-dali para lang.
Second is exemplification. Here's another example.
Ano ito? Utak na yan.
Uy, sabi na nga matatanda, masama daw magmura. Babae ka pa naman.
Oo, sabi sa religion natin tawag bakla.
Third is modesty. Here's an example.
Kita ko nakapasa ka ng books eh. Hindi na exam yun, di ba?
Kung nga eh, pero alam mo, hindi mo, nakachamba lang ako. Kasi ako sa archaeology eh, wala naman ako alam talaga.
Hindi ka rin ano ba?
Chamba lang sa puno sa kayo. Eh, ikaw nga eh, di ba? Nung senior high school kayo, na with high honor, hindi ba?
Hindi kasi magagaling na magturo yung mga teachers namin.
Ganun ba?
Oo, kasi minsan depende kapag hindi masyadong mag-explain yung teacher. Oo, hindi mo bigay.
Pero feeling ko, syempre, ambag ka pa din doon sa magaling high school.
Fourth is intimidation. Here's an example.
Uy, ano ba? Uy ka, dadaanan mo?
Hindi naman ako ah.
Oo, bakit pa ka nabangga? Pilitingin ka.
Ikaw hindi pinitingin, hindi ako boy.
Bakit? Ano mo nasan ka? Ano masino ako? Ha? Ano bang ano ako?
Fifth is supplication. For example,
Papa, kaya ako kayo nagdadalawa.
Bakit? Hindi niya ako sa araw ah.
Kasi parang dami natin na yata sa school. Hindi na nga ako kumain ko ngayon.
Yung anak, pagkulang ako namin kung ano, pang araw-araw.
Kahit konti lang pa. Kasi pati nga project ko, pinabayaran natin. Hindi report ka.
So ba yan? Yung kwarto mo nakita ko, puro mga make-up. May bilin. Ano pa? Media.
Focus na nga rin eh.
Kasi dito, telepon mo, saan mo? Oo, sumama.
and And the last is sandbagging. Here's an example.
Uy, friend! Nag-consume performance ko kanina. Dahil na pala sumayaw eh. Sabi mo, nahihiya ako.
Iya nga ako na totoo lang kung kinakabahan talaga ako ng
Pero mas ang galing mo. Magaling ka pa rin sa leader. Tapos na, ikinap ko lang eh. Hindi yung isang lalaki doon namin eh. Pangit sumayaw. Pero mas ang galing mo talaga.
Ineffective self-presentation and spoiled identities. What happens if our self-presentation fails? First is embarrassment. It is an unpleasant emotion that occurs when we believe that others have good reason to think a flaw has been revealed in us. Next is cooling out. It is gently persuading a person whose performance is unsuitable to accept a less desirable, true, still reasonable, alternative identity. Last is identity degradation. It is the process of destroying the offender's identity and transforming him or her into a lower social type. How can we prevent failure of self-presentation? It is self-handicapping. It is a person creates obstacles to his or her own performance, either provide an excuse for failure or to enhance success.